3 weeks ago, I headlined a public meeting our party held in Middlewalk, Victoria Village, on the east coast of Demerara. We arrived at around 6 in the afternoon, a little after sunset, twilight, that time within the 24-hour span, when you're not quite sure whether it's still day or if night has set in. The meeting was held at a crossroad, the asphalt Middlewalk intersected by a mud dam, and right across from where we had set up our glossy backdrop and high-tech speaker system, there was an old wooden church, painted white, nestled by 2 coconut trees. The church must have been decades old, and in my mind would not have looked out of place the day the first news of freedom reached the place we now know as Victoria Village. Victoria has a special stature in the history of emancipation in Guyana. The first village to be bought by slaves after the emancipation of 1838. In 1839, slaves of what was formerly Plantation Northbrook pooled together 35,000 guilders and bought the land that, in a more just system, should ideally have been handed over to them free of cost. As darkness settled in that historic place and our first speaker took to the podium, I couldn't help but feel 2 conflicting emotions. The first was gratitude, a humbling appreciation that we were given the privilege to speak at a place where once a people newly free from the shackles of slavery undertook a seminal act of self-emancipation, ownership of the land upon which they lived. The second was a small trepidation, a slight niggling fear that the meeting would not expand beyond the dozen persons that I saw gathered when we had first entered the village. By the time that it was my turn to speak, that second fear had faded. The gathering at the crossroads by the old church had quadrupled in number, with even more people lined up along the side of the road and down. During the speeches, the other presenters and I took some time to talk directly to some of the people gathered there. The cries and complaints that we heard were the same that we heard at half a dozen villages and communities across the country. Jobless young people with nothing to do, single mothers struggling to make ends meet, fathers working multiple hustles but never having enough money, trenches clogged with grass, roads being built that were potholed a year after they were finished, if they were ever finished at all. We have heard similar stories since, in Blairmont, in Rosal, in Legwan, in Georgetown. The same needs, the same frustrations, the same observations of wanton injustice. But it was in leaving Victoria, however, that I came away with a valuable lesson, one which has a national resonance. It is this: 173 years after the emancipation of slaves, 172 years after the Victoria Purchase, there remains a great chain that binds all of us in a kind of slavery, regardless of the history of our ancestors. A great chain whose links are stronger and more durable and more heavy than iron. The excessive VAT that is crippling you every time you go to the market is a link in that chain. The corruption that goes on without apology and with impunity is a link in that chain. The fear that if you change your way of thinking and exercise your right to make a choice, that's a link in that chain. The hardship that you have to conquer in everyday life, or else it conquers you, that is also a link in that chain. The increasing moral compromises that you find yourself forced to make just to survive are a link in that chain. I ask you this: what is slavery if not a system of exploitation and servitude forced upon a people from which they as a community cannot escape outside of some revolutionary act? Every dollar you are underpaid, whether you are working in the classroom or in the cane field, is an act of enslavement. Every time the meter man or the water rate man or the hire purchase man comes around and you find yourself frustrated and anxious, That is a state of enslavement. Every single time you go past the enormous house in Pradoville 2 that the president has built for himself, in which he can relax for the rest of his life on the strength of your sweat and funded by your money, you are seeing what the slave saw. The indecently opulent mansion of the governor that the slave built but could not dream to attain. And there indeed remains a dream of true emancipation which remains unfulfilled in this country today. Unfulfilled for the vast majority of us, descendants of the conquered, the enslaved, the indentured, and the oppressed. It remains unfulfilled from Victoria to Crabwood Creek, to Lethem to Leguan. What we have, however, what each of you individually has, the legacy of those who fought for freedom 200 years ago, who fought indentureship, who fought colonial oppression, who fought dictatorship, is the single most powerful tool that the slave did not. What we have is the power to vote. And that alone is more powerful than the dozens of insurrections plotted by those who suffered the yoke of slavery. Each vote to lift that burden that weighs you down is an act of emancipation. This August, this auspicious month in an even more auspicious year, the International Year of the People of African Descent, I urge all Guyanese to not just consider, but to resolve to enact their own personal and our collective emancipation. Thank you, and God bless.